Right, good morning everybody. My name's Tom Rains. I'm the head of the Europe programme here at Chatham House. Delighted to welcome you all to this Brexit-focused event this morning. So the subject of this morning's discussion, we were discussing the title we came up with towards a national compromise, the Common Market 2.0. And I suppose in some ways this is a very well-timed discussion given the remarkable, tumultuous politics of the moment. But at the same time, it's a sort of terribly timed discussion because we're leaving in 9 days and we don't have a national compromise at the moment. The PM's due to head to Brussels tomorrow. There's an extension letter being drafted or being dispatched at the moment. We know Parliament has rejected the deal twice. The Speaker has rejected Parliament rejecting the deal or accepting the deal a third time. Parliament has rejected no deal. So the list of options is growing thinner in terms of a positive agenda for what Parliament can accept, what a consensus and a majority can support. This morning we have a group of MPs from different parties who have come to talk about their proposal for how we move through this impasse, how we break the gridlock that we find ourselves in. And I'm just going to introduce them before we get into the substance of Common Market 2.0. So on my right is Stephen Kinnock. He's the MP for Aberavon, forgive me, since 2015. Labour MP, as the surname implies. Previously worked at the World Economic Forum. Good think tank credentials there. Nick Bowles, also formerly a think tanker in fact, has been the MP for Grantham and Stamford since 2010, I believe. Conservative MP. Lucy Powell is the MP for Manchester Central. Used to work for Ed Miliband before becoming MP in 2012. And Robert Halfon is the MP for Harlow, also the chair of the Education Select Committee and a former deputy chairman of the Conservative Party. So Stephen is going to introduce Common Market 2.0. He's going to give a short overview of what it means, what some of the pros, the cons, the strengths, the limitations, and then we have a chance, both on the panel and as an audience, to really get to grips with what it means. This is really, I think, a valuable opportunity for us to try to really understand the detail of what is a complex arrangement, but potentially a way forward that a majority can support. So, Stephen, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Tom, Nick, Robin, and everybody else at Chatham House for organising this event. I would also just like to say thanks to my fellow panellists today. We are a motley crew, you might say, but it's been a real pleasure and a privilege to work with you and with colleagues from our parties in our wider group, the Common Market 2.0 group. I'm really proud of the way that we've left our narrow party political tribalism aside in order to try to work in the national interest and in the spirit of compromise that I think this meeting is all about today. Thanks also to you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming along today so early in the morning for what I hope will be an informative conversation about our proposal. We call it Common Market 2.0. Michel Barnier likes to call it Norway Plus. But either way, we think it's the best way forward that can win parliamentary support and that can begin to reunite our deeply divided country. Now, someone once told me that the beginning of a speech should always contain a surprise for the audience, something that will really make them sit up and take notice. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start today by telling you that I completely agree with Nigel Farage. Yes, I agree with Nigel, who in 2016 said the following to a BBC Question Time audience 2 months before the referendum vote. I hear people say, this is my best Nigel Farage impression, I hear people say, wouldn't it be terrible if we were like Norway or Switzerland? They are rich, they're happy, and they're self-governing countries. And I also absolutely agree with Nigel's fellow Brexiteer, the MEP Daniel Hannan, who said, Norway and Switzerland. I can't help thinking they're doing pretty well. And if that wasn't enough of a surprise for you, I'd like to add that I concur entirely with their pal, the Tory Brexiteer MP Owen Paterson, who in 2015 said, only a madman would actually leave the market. Now, whilst you might find my budding bromance with the bad boys of Brexit quite amusing, there is actually a deadly serious reason for me sharing those quotes with you. Because what they demonstrate is that in 2016, Euroscepticism meant something that it apparently no longer means today. Today, Euroscepticism means setting off into the Brexit fantasy forest of unicorns and rainbows. Yet in 2016, Euroscepticism simply meant being opposed to political integration whilst cheerleading for the single market. It meant keeping the strong, mutually beneficial economic ties whilst defending the nation-state as the primary source of political power and accountability. And that, in a nutshell, is what Common Market 2.0 is all about. Theresa May's interpretation of the referendum result spelled the end of the pragmatic Euroscepticism of 2016 and replaced it with a brand of isolationism that has not only been deeply counterproductive for the Brexit negotiations, it has also profoundly damaged our country's reputation on the global stage. The fact is that 52-48 is not a mandate to remain in the EU and carry on with business as usual, but neither is it a call for a hard Canada-style Brexit, and it certainly isn't a call for leaving with no deal. The referendum result must be seen as a call to leave the EU's ever deeper political integration, whilst maintaining a strong, close and productive economic relationship with those 500 million consumers on our doorstep. In short, the referendum result is an instruction from the British people to move house, but to stay in the same neighbourhood. So, what does Common Market 2.0 actually ensure of the political declaration on the future relationship, which the EU are open to amending? It does not require any change to the 580-page withdrawal agreement, which the EU has made crystal clear is sealed shut. The rewriting of the political declaration would specify an UK-EU future relationship whereby the UK maintains full participation in the European Economic Area by joining the EEA's European Free Trade Association pillar. EFTA is a intergovernmental organisation that promotes free trade and economic integration without political or monetary union. The EEA's single market is essentially an extension of the EU's internal market beyond the EU 28 to also cover the 3 EFTA states that are signed up to the EEA, namely Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein. Due to the issues with the Irish border, during the transition phase, which is due to end in December 2020, although of course now with the extension could well change, the UK will need to negotiate on its succession to EFTA a derogation that will allow us to negotiate with the EU a comprehensive customs arrangement, including the common external tariff, unless and until alternative arrangements to secure frictionless trade on the Irish border can be agreed. A major strength of Common Market 2.0 is that it is by far the fastest route to Brexit, and therefore attractive to those MPs and to the wider public who are desperate to get on with it, whilst at the same time removing almost all the risk of the Irish backstop ever having to come into play. It also recognises that a permanent customs union is not strictly necessary. Common Market 2.0 would give the UK full membership of the single market, which the UK helped to create, and which underpins so many British businesses' trading success. But we would leave the EU's political institutions, leave the jurisdiction of the ECJ, of the Common Agriculture and Fishery Policies, and the EU's drive towards ever closer union. We would also increase our power to control freedom of movement. I'll say a little bit more about that later. Crucially, it is an option that is popular with voters. Whenever myself, Lucy, Rob or Nick are out on the doorstep in Aberavon, Manchester, Harlow or Grantham, we hear the same message time and again from our older voters. We voted for a common market back in the 1970s. We did not vote for all this political stuff. In the 1970s and 1980s, the British people broadly supported our membership of the European Economic Community because it delivered clear economic benefits to British business and workers. It was only ever as the ever closer political union took hold that the paths of the United Kingdom and the European Union began to diverge, and that, I think, dates from the Maastricht Treaty. A newly founded UK-EU common market for the 21st century would respect the public desire for striking the right balance between political sovereignty and economic integration. It would recast our country's relationship with the EU in a way that would better reflect our history, geography, and politics. Common Market 2.0 should also be seen as a reset moment for Europe. Popular consent for the European project is under threat, and Macron was right recently to talk about Europe's future being one of several circles. He said, "We have to build a Europe with several formats to go further with those who want to go forward without being hindered by those states that want, as is their right, to go not as fast or as far." That is absolutely the right strategy. There are several European countries that will never join the euro, that will never sign up to a European army, and that have deep reservations about the free movement of labour. The creation of an outer ring of non-EU countries that participate in the single market but opt out of ever deeper political integration would be a huge step in the right direction, and the UK could play a central role in that outer circle. Now, let's turn our attention to one or two of the elephants in the room, one or two of the myths, if you like, that have been circulating about Common Market 2.0. Let's start with one that I alluded to earlier, that Common Market 2.0 means no changes on free movement of labour. Yes, it's true that free movement of labour would continue initially under Common Market 2.0, but there would be a marked improvement in our position in that we could apply the safeguard measures that are written into the EEA agreement. These safeguards give a qualified but unilateral right to any of the EFTA EEA members under Article 112 of the EEA agreement to suspend freedom of movement if that country believes it is suffering serious societal or economic difficulties. We would then be able to renegotiate freedom of movement under Article 113, perhaps based on regional or industry quotas. But if negotiations were to break down, we could not be forced to reopen our borders. Article 114 allows retaliation from the other single market countries, but this reaction would have to be reciprocal. They could not, for instance, respond to our decision to suspend the free movement of labour by suspending our exports of goods or services to them. These measures are clearly not to be used lightly, but the Article 112 and 113 safeguard measures could help to ease our public's existing fears about the seemingly limitless nature of free movement of labour. The second myth is that the UK would become a rule taker. This is simplistic, and it ignores the fact that under the terms of Common Market 2.0, the UK would be leaving the European Court of Justice and thereby ending the principle of the direct effect of EU law. The EFTA court that the UK would join respects national sovereignty in a way that the ECJ doesn't. Plus, we would have 1 out of 4 EFTA court judges rather than the 1 out of 28 that we currently have on the ECJ. Under EEA lawmaking, the EFTA nations have a right to be consulted by the EU at a technical level. And once a directive has become law, it is passed on to the EEA Joint Committee, on which the EFTA nations sit alongside the EU. From there, the EFTA nations can delay, adapt, or veto legislation, either by claiming that it is not relevant to EEA nations or that it triggers constitutional requirements. It is worth noting that between 1993 and 2011, Norway and Iceland have derogated from EU law on 400 occasions between them. And it is also worth remembering that less than a third of EU directives affect the EEA in the first place. Under Common Market 2.0, we would restore policy-making power in vast areas, including agriculture, fisheries, foreign security affairs, justice and home affairs, and taxation. Myth number 3, that we have to pay more or less the same amount into EU budgets. This is wrong. We'd pay close to 50% per capita of what we pay now. Each EFTA EEA member pays only for the institutions and services that they access. And myth number 4, that Norway doesn't want us. Well, the Norwegian Prime Minister has made clear her position. She has said, if joining EFTA is what the UK really wants, we will find solutions in the future. She also said, to find a good agreement, it is important for all European countries, and I hope that we will see an orderly deal that doesn't disrupt economic affairs in Europe. Myth number 5, the EU don't support it. Well, in May 2018, Michel Barnier said, the only frictionless model for the future with the UK would be Norway Plus, Norway being part of the single market plus a customs union. From the outset, Barnier made it clear that a Norway-style relationship would have been welcomed by the EU side, and that it was never explored properly because of our Prime Minister's red lines. Michel Barnier has also made clear that the EU was ready to renegotiate the future relationship. In January, he said, if the United Kingdom chooses to change its red lines and to be more ambitious and go beyond a simple free trade deal in our future relationship, then the EU would be ready to do so immediately. So that's a flavour of the Common Market 2.0 proposal that we're putting forward. But how do we get there? How do we break the deadlock in Westminster? Well, there can be no doubt that our politics is both polarised and paralysed. At one end of the spectrum, we have the People's Vote campaign fighting tooth and nail for a second referendum. And at the other side, we have the ERG, desperate for an ideological 19th century no deal, BrExit built on rainbows, unicorns, and Empire 2.0. But in all truth, it is not really Parliament that is the problem. The problem, of course, is the Prime Minister. It is her red lines that have tied our country up in knots. It is her stubbornness that has plunged us into this political and constitutional crisis by depriving the House of the opportunity to have a proper debate about the most important issue to face our country since the Second World War. The fact is that there has always been a cross-party parliamentary majority for a sensible, pragmatic, bridge-building form of Brexit. Our cross-party group of MPs has held very constructive and productive conversations with the leader of my party and his team, and we hope that we will be able to secure the Labour whip in support for a backbench-driven Common Market 2.0 motion or amendment. And if we can combine that Labour block vote with a sufficient number of Conservative MPs, and here I look to Rob and Nick, no pressure there, guys, then we believe that we can get Common Market 2.0 over the line. Ladies and gentlemen, Britain is a great country, but we are more divided than we have been at any time in living memory. Young versus old, graduate versus non-graduate, city versus town. These divisions were not created by Brexit, but they were ruthlessly exposed at the ballot box in June 2016. Since then, the fault lines have deepened and widened, to the extent that I believe that our country is in serious danger of tipping into a culture war. So it is time now for Parliament to step up and do its job. It's time for us to rediscover the lost art of compromise and to break the deadlock. It's time for us to find a way out of this mess. It's time to heal the wounds and to reunite our deeply divided country. Thank you.